That's better, right? It's all better now. So the idea, this is what was, by the way, it was from the Course in Miracles workbook, lesson 101, which is, this is the, this is the 101st day of the year, unless I got off on my practice, which has happened before. God's will for me is perfect happiness. I was thinking about that this, well, the meditation for actually tomorrow, because we switched up the order, so the bulletin goes Monday to Monday, or Monday to Sunday. All right. That we have tasks. It's the first one. That's for tomorrow. That we have tasks. That we have a job to do, and that job is part of God's will. But this lesson for today is reporting that God's will is for happiness. So then that must mean that our job, our task, has to have something to do with happiness. And I think that that's the way that we have to look at it. Because if it's not, if we're out there just toiling and either for a paycheck or just to get through, or everything is some kind of huge challenge and burden, then it's very difficult to be happy and impossible to find peace. So I wrote this, part of this task is the way that we interact with others. And so I wrote this poem and about interacting with those around us. And it's not an easy practice, but it's one that will actually bring happiness. So I will listen to your complaints and bite my tongue to keep from offering advice. I will listen to your fraud and not point out the reality of love. And I will listen and wait patiently, knowing that you will discern my untold vision of your loveliness. So this is joining. This is joining with life. And it shouldn't be a struggle. This joining with life should be a relaxation. It should be a letting go and a merging in a very calm way with everything that's going on around us. And this the message I sent out this morning just said, help. And then I named the video, can I get a little help? And this is actually where this idea of getting help and giving help, they go together. They're reciprocal in a way that's not tit for tat. It's not that I do this and you do that for me, that kind of reciprocation, but it's that I help, and then help comes from somewhere. It may come back to me right directly from wherever I helped, but more than likely it's going to come from somewhere else. And in order for that to happen, I have to join into life as it flows. I have to get into the water's warm. Come on in. To flow with the river of life. And to think about this idea of unity. See, all the problems and all this, what the meditation was really, the underlying theme of the meditation was, when I separate myself from life, I separate myself from God, because God is the unity of all life. And so when I have complaint, when I believe that I am, this word sin is such a highly charged word, but when I believe that I am less than and that my behavior is such that it separates me from the good of God and what I really have coming as punishment, when I think like that, then I produce like that in my life. my 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 mental faculties actually lend themselves not not just to make those situations in my life, but just have a bent where that's the way I see it coming at me. And so, and then of course my actions are going to follow all of those feelings. So this suffering that comes from our inability or unwillingness to accept our ultimate oneness, that it is delusional. It's that we think we are small separate selves, and I wrote yesterday when I was flying, I was listening to this Buddhist psychology book, and I just he said something that then made me write this, and this is really the crux of this idea is I have no self of my own. It seems like I do, but the self that I identify with and that I do all these different things to protect is really just a collection of experiences that changes moment to moment. Now I try to hold on to it and make it solid by continuing to remember all the things that have come to the past because that's what I think established myself. But actually, this self, it has no, and the doctors, the scientists can't find it anywhere in the brain. They can't find the place where this self resides. But I have no self of my own. I exist only in the larger self. And this state of existing, it can be thought of as the greater self, the divine mind, a larger organism, unity of all life, or simply, if you prefer, just God. This is a state in which we exist. We exist in God. And all these other concepts, all these concepts that I listed there have different meanings depending upon the outlook of your non-existent small self. Because we all think about it, we all think about those concepts in a different way, but really, and this is what Rumi said, is that all religions are just streams feeding into the ocean of one thing. So and this, we've talked about this before, that we have the right to a God of our own understanding, but it's the understanding we have the right to. That we don't get to have our own private God. God is, and how we understand it is what we all do differently. So we trapped in this illusion, we seek pleasure to forget our aloneness. We attempt to avoid consequences of our perceived separateness also. So we seek pleasure to forget about it, but we try to avoid whatever painful experiences come to us, and then we make up we are deluded. We are living in a delusion which gives us the justification and the rationalization to do the first two. So these are the three things that are going on all the time in this construct of the self. We're seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and then being deluded as to the nature of the first two, and deluded as to why we're doing it all. So to wake up from the nightmare of self-centeredness, we recognize that we're not alone and never have been alone. And this is a theme that we talk about almost every Sunday. That this idea of surrendering the ego to the combined strength of our fellows, of our family, of our friends. This is a surrender into this larger organism. And it turns out that this is where we will find our happiness. All of the seeking, all of the self-centered meanderings just lead to more problems. They just lead to more suffering. What's very interesting, though, is that when we actually surrender ourselves into this larger organism, that happiness just comes as a result of the activity that we participate in then as part of. We find that happiness is ours. Being part of this of this greater thing, awakening from aloneness into an integrated spiritual consciousness. This is what the 12-step in the recovery programs would be talking about, is having a spiritual awakening. If you look at it in terms of the disorder of addiction, knowing that the core, the very basis of the disorder is self-centeredness, then this awakening becomes a waking up from that self-centeredness. And we remember that that always when we start suffering, we know that what's happened is we have gone back into it, that we have, suffering comes when we go back into it. Now, this does not mean that pain will not occur, because pain happens. I mean, things happen in life. The thing that we end up beginning to have a choice over is how long we stay in the pain. In other words, are we going to suffer for how long? This is, Mark and I were talking about this last night. Sometimes we'll notice that we're suffering personally. A lot of times it's easy to think that someone else is the cause of that suffering. But if we observe what's going on in our interactions with others, that if someone else seems to be causing us suffering, it is because they are suffering. If it's true, I mean, it could be delusion too. We need to always allow for the fact that we could be making it all up, right? But if we come to the understanding that the only way that someone else can cause suffering is out of their own suffering. And so then it comes back to this idea of, okay, what's my job? This is what am I supposed to be doing? Well, what I'm supposed to be doing is being of service, and we would call it carrying the message, or giving love. So that would mean that the way that I would deal with someone else causing suffering would be for me to realize that what I need to do is be an example of love, that I need to be an example of peace. Now, sometimes it may be appropriate to point out their bad behavior, but I would think that the majority of the time it's not. That the best course of action is going to be for us to present an example of, perhaps not the opposite behavior, but the example of a healing behavior in regards to what they're doing. And this then would be service. And we notice that as soon as we do that, as soon as we take our attention off of how this other person is causing us discomfort and put our attention on relieving their discomfort, our discomfort goes away. It's a whole different group of chemicals begins to rush into the body when we change that perspective. So we come to this conclusion that this unity is present all the time. And we can access it whenever we want to. Sometimes we talked about this last week. Sometimes we believe that we can be disunifying, and what happens or somebody else is causing disunity in the group, in our collective, in our family. This person is always difficult. They're always contrary. They're always. But the fact of the matter is that what's happened is we have taken our attention off of unity. We've taken our attention off of unity because unity is always there. We're always together, even if we act like we're not. So we've taken our attention off of unity and placed it on this particular behavior. Well, in life, there's always things to do. There's always things to do. And if we cooperate with this overarching larger organism, our tasks will be lighter and we will be more helpful. We remember that all the things that we have to do, have some impact on others. So in order to establish and maintain good relationships, we remember the common welfare, what's best for all of us. Keeping this in mind, it's important to establish this idea of a shared conscience state of mind. That the shared outlook comes from, first of all, a conscious connection to the larger self. And this would be the result of prayer and meditation that establishes in our mind a sense and something real between us and God. There's a communication in one way or another between us and God. The way we can tell if this is going on is, are we at peace? Does it feel like love? It's like two real simple. If it feels like upset and anxiety and worry and fear and anger, it is definitely not a conscious contact with this larger thing. Many times we get the idea that God may be sending us a message of alarm saying, you are my little soldier and you need to get in here and fix this before some damage is done. It is not a true message. That's the ego telling us that we need to do this. So if this larger self, higher power, unity, whatever we want to call it, but this is the power of love that is always present, and when we feel that, then guidance just kind of naturally comes. So when we're connected in this way, it's not necessary for us to worry about what to do, because we'll be led. So this is like this is so many times in life we can be alone, we can be with a group of people. What to do? Well, first, stop worrying. Just that sense of anxiety of trying to approach the problem with a sense of really impending doom. Many times we've got to fix this. We have to relax. We have to reestablish this contact, this conscious contact with this power greater than ourselves. So wherever we find ourselves, there's a task. There's help that we're supposed to give. And as I said at the beginning, wherever we find ourselves, there's help that we're going to receive. So this is always going on. We are here to be truly helpful, and when we are truly helpful, we are helped. So what that is, of course, is being helpful means being attuned to and operating out of goodwill. So, and we know, sometimes, it seems so urgent. Things seem so urgent that we kind of shove aside the idea of principle. We shove aside, this is serious business. We're taking ourselves too seriously. And the business actually gets shortchanged because of how seriously we are taking ourselves in our own opinion. So to surrender to the author, I like that idea, that when you think about authority and who's going to be the authority, and to think, okay, so who can be the authority as the author, the creator? That will just let the author be the authority. That to surrender to that power that extended itself as us, to relax, to let that presence of a loving God be felt. So it's right there in the moment. It's so close. It's just a breath away. That presence, when we relax into it, can be felt in mind and body. It can be felt between partners, in a relationship, in a marriage, in a friendship. It can be felt between us. And it can be felt in the midst of a larger group. I mean, obviously, every one of these things that I've said, within, between, and all around, this is the field of goodwill. This is the whole idea of the common welfare for the larger organism. So every one of these iterations, a couple, a group, is a symbol for the larger. And so therefore, this presence can be felt in any of those relationships. So what happens is the presence of love opens us up to trust. It opens our hearts so that we can extend trust. Sometimes very difficult. Sometimes people in the group, whatever group it might be, have done things in the past that makes us not want to trust them. But we are not trusting them individually. We're trusting the love of God, the action of this higher power in the midst of us. This is the thing to trust, because that's the thing that will heal all of us. So our sense of connection bestows trust on others and likewise makes us trustworthy. So we surrender, we trust the God of our understanding and that loving presence to instruct us in the help that we're supposed to give. Take no authority over each other, but in all things surrender to the loving presence in your hearts, allowing that to be your guide. That's the second thing I tell them in the marriage ceremony. So when we surrender, an amazing thing happens. When we surrender and become calm and at peace, that which comes from us can be inspiring to others. Each and every one of us can be inspiring. A loving God will speak through us if we're open. So, practice the presence. God speaks through us. We get quiet for a moment. We focus on the breath. We attempt to let go of the ego. This is like the ego in this regard could be thought of as our agenda. We may think that we've got this list of things that need to be accomplished in this interaction with others. And this doesn't just happen at work or in some service committee that we might be on. It happens at the family dinner table. Hopefully we still have that from time to time. And but it happens just in conversation between people. We get an agenda in our mind. We have a goal that we're moving towards, and we're going to try to move all of the pieces on the board to suit the outcome that we're looking for. But we practice the presence. We relax and let go of all of this insane babble of the ego telling us you need to say this and do that and act this way in order to move the thing to where you know that's right. We don't know. In that frame of mind, we don't know. So because what's happening when we're doing that is we're missing the voice for love. We're missing actually Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is speaking to us. And we're missing it because we're listening to the monkey mind. Monkey mind. Monkey mind is always afraid because it thinks that the world is lacking bananas. So the words of Spirit become like cool water to the thirsty. They uplift us, they inspire us. If we can maintain that state of mind, all that proceeds from us will be goodwill. Everything that comes out of us. When we find ourselves falling back into delusion of self-centeredness, which will happen every day, maybe every other minute. It's happening all the time. This is the thing. We're always slipping back. So we can just return our focus to the breath, and that being the symbol of oneness. And that's through this continued practice, we find that a loving God will express through us thought, word, and deed. And also from this point of view, we can allow ourselves to be inspired. We can focus on the inspiration that comes to us from our partner. Wouldn't this be a change? To open ourselves to and in this case, our partner could be our spouse, our lover, our friend, somebody in our business, but to actually relax and focus on what they are saying, to realizing that this loving presence will also speak through them. That as we relax into the presence and we focus on how that presence extends out from us in all directions, we realize that we are not the author of the power. We are not the authority. We are not the author of the power, but rather creations of that power. And all the people around us are also creations of that power. So if we listen closely, we can hear God speaking through them. And it's not necessarily the words themselves that can be inspiring, although they may be. To hear God, all we have to do is release our judgment on those other people. If we relinquish comparisons and be still for a moment, we will be inspired by the presence itself. And the divine in us is always speaking soft words of love. They may be hidden within comments. They may be hidden in compliments. They may even be hidden in the complaints of others, but they are there. Because the complaints of others, give us a hint as to how we might be helpful. That doesn't mean we just give in to them either. Doing all this does not mean to go along to get along. Because that is always a sacrifice, and there is no sacrifice called for in goodwill. There can't be a sacrifice in the common welfare because it's what's best for everyone involved. So then what happens is we become united, and we see that unity is this all-pervading principle. We can try to annoy it, or we can try to ignore it. We can lose our sense of it. We can even deny it, but it's always present. In a very real way, we are connected to the overarching purpose of life itself. So think about life as all being woven together in a web. And so when we think about being united, we can start with our partners. We start with those closest to us. We start with our friends. Then we can see how this unification stretches from twos and threes to groups, through communities, all the way through the entirety of creation. So we realize that we really cannot be in charge of anything, because we're always toting around everybody else in one way or another. We can take our appropriate responsibility for our part, for what's ours to do, but we leave the power with the interactive whole. Not only when we turn over our sense of authority, we are given the power back from the group. We become united with all creation. So, then I want to, just one last one I want to touch on is this idea of being a servant, because this really is, Jesus said, your servants will be the greatest among you. He wasn't actually talking about the cook. He wasn't talking about the butler, but it could have been. Could have been. But really the point of it was the one who extends service is the one, and not greatest meaning that is more elevated, but greatest meaning this is what you need to emulate. This is your example. This is so this idea of being a servant, sometimes it's uncomfortable. For many people in our culture, the idea, and it's worse in others, the idea of considering yourself a servant is to denigrate yourself, that it's somehow degrading. Perhaps we think that when we put ourselves into such a position, it would make it easy for our partners or our fellows to take advantage of us. We may think that the servant is somehow subordinate to those who are served. I mean, from either end. If we're the servant, we may think we're subordinate, and if we're the one being served, we may think that the servant is subordinate. This is not a good state of mind to be in. So understandably, as these concerns may seem, they're erroneous. They just don't hold water. Freely given service is an honor and a privilege, and it advances both the servant and the served. So service should be reciprocal, but not in an expectant sort of way. We may give to one and receive from another. The truth is that when we move through life on purpose, we find ourselves being served as much, if not more, than we actually serve ourselves. The relationship between the servant and the served is an ever-shifting trading of roles. Each one establishes a relationship of total equality in which no one is ever relegated to lesser status. This is like this huge point. Because sometimes when we get used to being served, we start to expect a certain level of service from people. And this is not to say here that it's not okay to call people's attention to the fact that the job actually didn't get done as well as it should have. But when we believe that somehow they are answerable to us in a personal way, this is where we get off track. When we are a servant, we are answerable to the larger community. We are answerable to the larger organism. And when we are served, we understand that everything that results out of the service that's given to us is also from and connected to the larger organism. So it's not so if things we don't get exactly what we need, it's not a personal affront. It's all part of this connected thing. And that's, so when we're serving, we want to be conscientious. We want to being conscientious means that we're concerned with what is right according to our values. That we're giving this proper service. It's a gauge of what we do. The endeavor, the right thing for the right reason at the right time. We relate to what we can do. We relate what we can do in life to what is in our conscience. Our conscience sometimes is identified as our guide to good behavior. But we all have a conscience, although sometimes we may try to ignore it. But if we surrender our ego, surrender those desires to the common welfare, we become able to access this larger thing. This is this cool idea that we can access this larger consciousness. And the access to this thing that some of us know the term of group conscience. It's a group conscience state of mind. It's this ability to express goodwill through our combined conscience. We come together in this quiet way. But this is so goodwill would be what is best for everyone involved. And ideally, when we access this shared conscience, we want to be in the presence of our partner or our fellows. It's kind of important that this is the ideal. The ideal is that we surrender our personal agenda into this greater thing as we gather together. And we make decisions based on this calm, collected, peaceful, loving consciousness that we've established in the midst of us. We can do this with 2, with 3, with however many, as long as surrender is involved. Sometimes, when a decision must be made and our partners are not present, it is still possible to access this group conscience state of mind. It's tricky. The ground is fraught with danger. But if we surrender our ego desires and put a tight focus on the common welfare, when we're alone and forced to make a decision that's going to affect others, we can access that group conscience state of mind and make a decision for goodwill, for the common welfare. So this is what we want to do, to be conscientious, to always keep our partners in mind while practicing our good service. That's enough.